In the summer of 2024, the brutal trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war took a sudden and unprecedented turn. The epicenter of this shift was not in the blood-soaked trenches of Donbas, the contested fields near Kharkiv, or the strategic expanse of Zaporizhzhia. Instead, it was a region etched into the annals of military history, Kursk, Russia. For the first time since the full-scale conflict began in 2022, the Ukrainian regular army initiated a major ground operation, not in defense of its own territory, but as a direct thrust into the heartland of its adversary. The international press described this maneuver as Kyiv's most audacious and high-stakes operation since the war's outset. What were the objectives behind this deep cross-border offensive? Why was Kursk chosen as the crucible for this new phase of the war? And how did this violent gambit reshape the strategic landscape of the entire conflict? To comprehend the Kursk operation, one must first examine the grim reality of the front lines in the summer of 2024. At that time, Russian forces were relentlessly prosecuting their offensive in the Donetsk region, grinding forward with overwhelming force, particularly toward the critical hub of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian units, stretched thin and under immense pressure, were compelled to concentrate their finite resources to blunt this advance. This strategic imperative locked them into a protracted, attritional, and largely reactive defensive posture along a vast and unforgiving front line. Faced with this grueling stalemate, Ukrainian high command appears to have devised a radically different solution. Predicated on a classic military dictum, if the enemy cannot be stopped at one point, force them to divert their strength to defend another. The stated objectives from Kyiv were twofold. First, to create a strategic diversion, exerting enough pressure on Russian soil to compel Moscow to pull vital reserves and artillery away from the main eastern front. Second, to generate significant psychological and political leverage by carrying the war deep into Russian territory, thereby shattering the Kremlin-esque narrative of a controlled conflict and creating a tangible bargaining chip for any future negotiations. On the Russian side, the Kursk Oblast presented a picture of perceived security, though one with underlying vulnerabilities. The long border with Ukraine's Sumy Oblast was primarily secured not by frontline army units, but by formations of the FSB Border Guard and the National Guard, or Rosverdia, which included a significant number of conscripts and less experienced personnel. While reports suggest that Russian intelligence had issued warnings about a potential Ukrainian buildup in the area, these alerts apparently failed to trigger a commensurate and timely response from the highest echelons of military command in Moscow. This initial state of preparedness, or lack thereof, would prove to be a critical factor in the opening hours of the operation. The selection of Kursk as the target for this operation was anything but arbitrary. It was a calculated decision resting on three fundamental pillars. The first was tactical. The terrain of the border region adjacent to Ukraine's Sumy Oblast is relatively open, with fewer significant natural barriers compared to other potential axes of advance. More crucially, intelligence assessments indicated that the defensive lines here were comparatively thin, creating a potential gap for a determined mechanized assault to exploit. The second factor was deeply symbolic. The name Kursk is inextricably linked to the colossal tank battle of 1943, where the Soviet Red Army decisively broke the back of a major Nazi German offensive, a moment revered as a cornerstone of Russian military pride. By launching an offensive there, Ukraine was engaging in a form of historical warfare, deliberately aiming to subvert and tarnish a powerful symbol of Russian national victory. The third and final factor was logistical. While not a primary industrial or military heartland on the scale of other Russian regions, the area around the town of Zaporizhzhia in Kursk Oblast contains crucial rail and road networks. Seizing control of this territory would allow Ukrainian forces to threaten the logistical arteries supplying Russian formations on the northern sectors of the front. Adding a concrete military value to the symbolic blow, the campaign itself unfolded in a series of distinct and violent phases, a brutal testament to the interplay between tactical surprise and the grim calculus of total war. The initial phase, the surprise breakthrough, commenced in the pre-dawn hours of August 6, 2024, under the cover of a massive, preparatory barrage of artillery and a swarm of drone attacks. Elite Ukrainian units, including elements of the 80th and 82nd Air Assault Brigades, surged across the border with armored support. The Russian border guards and local defense forces were caught completely off guard, their positions rapidly overrun. Within a matter of days, Ukrainian forces had driven 25 to 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, seizing control of an area estimated at approximately 1,000 square kilometers, which included dozens of towns and villages. The initial shock gave way to the second phase, consolidation and stabilization. Russia, recovering from the initial blow, began a rapid deployment of reserve forces, pulling units from other regions and mobilizing non-priority formations to the Kursk front. The advance of the Ukrainian spearheads slowed, then ground to a halt as Russian resistance stiffened. By early October, the front line had largely stabilized, transforming the fluid breakthrough into a static, attritional confrontation. Notably, however, many observers pointed out that Russia refrained from withdrawing its primary offensive formations from the Donetsk front, instead relying on reserves and newly deployed units to contain the Kursk incursion. This cast doubt on the initial effectiveness of Ukraine's primary strategic goal of forcing a large-scale diversion. The third phase, beginning in November 2024, marked a significant and controversial escalation. The arrival of North Korean military forces deployed to support the Russian army. Bolstered by this external reinforcement, Russian commanders launched a powerful counteroffensive. The fighting intensified dramatically, becoming exceptionally fierce and costly for both sides as Russia began to claw back territory. By early March 2025, the fourth and final phase of the main operation appeared to conclude. Under the weight of the relentless Russian counterassault, the bulk of Ukrainian forces conducted a phased withdrawal back toward their own territory, though sporadic cross-border raids and skirmishes continued to flare. The Kursk operation stands as a compelling case study in the realities of modern warfare, where audacious strategic concepts collide with the brutal physics of combat. On the Ukrainian side, the operation was a masterclass in secrecy and deception. Preparations began in deep secrecy as early as March 2024, with entire brigades being moved and re-equipped under the guise of routine exercises. To maintain operational security, officers were reportedly ordered not to wear their uniforms when arriving in assembly areas, to avoid attracting local attention. The assault itself utilized special forces tactics, with small six-person teams infiltrating first to act as forward observers and guides for the main armored thrust. These elements, combined with the initial shock and the agility of their light infantry units, allowed them to exploit the gaps in Russia's border defenses with devastating speed. Conversely, the Russian military displayed a slow and disjointed initial response. Its early warning systems appeared to have malfunctioned or been ignored, and the forces on the ground were simply overwhelmed. However, once the counterattack was organized, Russia brought its inherent advantages to bear: near-total air superiority, overwhelming artillery firepower, and the logistical benefit of fighting within its own dense transportation network. The controversial decision to mobilize. North Korean forces also demonstrated a grim flexibility in sourcing manpower to plug critical gaps, exposing a potential weakness in Russia. Its own strategic reserve capacity, but also its willingness to use unconventional means to regain the initiative. The operation starkly revealed that Russia's vast border was a potential liability, difficult to defend in its entirety against a determined and well-planned assault. Throughout the fighting, technology remained a decisive factor, with tactical FPV drones and reconnaissance UAVs playing a crucial role for both sides in reconnaissance, fire control, and direct attack. The consequences of the Kursk operation reverberated far beyond the military map. Within Russia, the Kremlin declared a state of emergency in the region and undertook the largest civilian evacuation since the war began, displacing over 144,000 people from their homes. This created significant social disruption and economic loss. While directly challenging, President Putin's standing and his implicit promise to the Russian people that the conflict would not reach their doorsteps. For Ukraine, the operation ignited a surge in domestic morale and confidence. It demonstrated to its Western allies a capacity for proactive, complex military planning and execution, which in turn created a powerful symbolic achievement. However, this came at a staggering cost. The operation consumed invaluable and finite resources, including tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of armored vehicles. This concentration of force on the Kursk front arguably left defensive lines in Donbas more vulnerable, a weakness that Russian forces were quick to exploit. This trade-off sparked intense debate within Ukraine and among its partners about whether those precious resources might have been better used to fortify the Eastern Front. Internationally, deep penetration into Russian territory forced a fundamental reassessment within Western capitals regarding restrictions on the use of supplied weaponry, leading to several significant shifts in policy. In the final analysis, the Kursk campaign will be recorded not as a decisive turning point in the traditional sense, but as a complex and costly strategic gambit. From a military perspective, it was a remarkable tactical success that fell short of its primary strategic objective. Ukraine proved its ability to plan and execute a sophisticated surprise attack, but it failed to compel a major withdrawal of Russian forces from the Donbas. The campaign underscored the immense difficulty of sustaining an offensive in the face of an enemy with overwhelming air and fire superiority. Its true significance may lie in the psychological and political domains. The operation irrevocably shattered the illusion that the war was a conflict confined to Ukrainian territory, bringing its brutal reality directly home to Russia. It placed the Kremlin under immense political pressure and damaged the image of an unassailable Russian state. For Ukraine and its allies, it was a powerful demonstration that Russia was not an impenetrable fortress. The Kursk operation of 2024 also leaves behind a legacy of difficult questions and dangerous precedents. The question of its cost-effectiveness remains fiercely debated, but the undeniable psychological and political gains worth the immense human and material cost, and the subsequent weakening of the critical Donbas front. Furthermore, the campaign sets a perilous example for the future of warfare, where internationally recognized borders can be violently blurred, risking unpredictable geographical escalation. It also highlights a trend towards unconventional solutions to military stalemates, such as the use of foreign expeditionary forces that could have destabilizing global consequences. The Kursk campaign will be remembered as Ukraine's most audacious attempt to break the stalemate of a long and brutal war. It was not a battle that delivered a final victory, but rather a powerful psychological blow that forced all parties to reevaluate the very nature and limits of the conflict. It demonstrated that in modern warfare, the battlefield encompasses not just physical territory, but also public perception, international resolve, and political will. In launching the Kursk operation, Ukraine chose to fight on all of these fronts simultaneously. Yet, it also stands as a grim reminder of the attritional nature of war, where even the most spectacular tactical victories are paid for in blood and carry with them a host of unforeseen and perilous consequences. The full story of Kursk 2024, much like its historic namesake, will ultimately be judged and understood with the clarity of distance by the historians of the future. For now, however, the war continues.